Do you want to know how to make your snare sound punchy while at the same time wide and in tune with your song, so the whole thing sounds professional like the pop songs you hear on the radio? This is like the extra detail that takes your production to the next level. So stick around and I'll show you how to achieve that memorable snare sound that will make your music stand out. Hey, how's it going? I'm Thales, a pop music producer, and today I was mixing my new song when I realized that even though my snare already sounded good, I was missing something. I pictured it wide and with different colors throughout the stereo field, meaning I didn't want it to sound like it was just a mono snare sample. Not in this particular song. So even though I had already tuned it to the key of the song and used some compression and a gate effect to make it punchy, I could still enhance it. Actually, it all started like this. And I'll show you step by step everything I did to my snare to achieve this sound. Much better, right? Here's how to do it in your song today. Now, this is not mandatory, but I like to start my snare processing by tuning to the key of my song. However, most people just use the warp feature to tune drum hits. And I know I did that a lot in the past, and what you usually end up with is a flabby, dead sounding snare. That usually screws up the high frequencies and a bunch of frequencies that shouldn't be involved in a simple task like tuning drums. In fact, the only frequency you need to affect is the fundamental frequency. But that's not an easy task, so to change the pitch of your snares while causing the least damage to the balance of its sound, the best tool is a frequency shifter, like the one that comes with Ableton Live. And a quick way to do it, so you don't waste any time on this, is to use a spectrum analyzer, like Voxengo's Span, and take a look at the fundamental frequency of your snare. In this case, the fundamental frequency is on a D at 148 Hz. Then figure out which note you want to tune it to. In this case, I want to bring it down all the way to the B at 124 Hz. Between 148 and 124, there's a difference of 24 Hz. So all I have to do is configure my frequency shifter to decrease 24 Hz from the signal. That way, it barely touches the high frequencies and we don't lose that buzz. Now, even though this sample is centered in the stereo, it's not entirely mono. Check this out. There's good stereo content already, but not enough for my taste. I like wide sounding snares like the one from the song Maps by Maroon 5. And it still sounds too simple, so the next thing I usually do is layer some more snare samples just to thicken it and get more content in different parts of the frequency spectrum. So I searched my sample library and found another sample that could help fatten this sound. I could see how it supplements the other sample, but I didn't like the decay. There's a bit of something like a pink noise towards the end of the sample, and I think it's a bit too long for what the song needs. This is what they sound like together. It's starting to sound fuller, but it's time to add some buzz processing. So my approach is to group them up and equalize until it starts to resemble the kind of sound I'm going for, which in this song was the snare from a song by Adele. I added a lot of low mid frequencies there at around 150 Hz. Usually I would also add distortion, probably with the saturated effect, but this one already sounds kinda gritty and distorted, so I skipped the saturated this time. Then compress if needed. Compressors are usually a good strategy to help different samples blend together. And I compress these two with a very short attack to reduce the transients. This song is not super aggressive, so I don't need this huge transient cutting through the mix. I'm still going to place vocals on top, and as a pop music producer, I naturally want that to be the main element. Everything else has to sit behind it, so I smoothed it by reducing the initial attack and used the gate plugin to chop the final buzz. And this is the secret to the punchy snare. Chopping the sound suddenly gives it more impact. By the way, just as a side note, I made it so the pitch and the panning of the bottom snare layer changes with every hit just to create some variation that will help my program drums sound less artificial and robotic. Just don't want it to be boring, you know? Alright, these two layers already sound pretty good. I could stop right here, add a room reverb and call it a day, right? Here's what it sounds like with the rest of the instruments. But there's a lot of good snares out there, and if we want to stand out, we need to be willing to go the extra mile and make it not only good, but awesome. And how do you make something sound awesome? You make it wide. But how? I'm about to show you the real secret from today's video that will improve your snare sounds by 100 times and give you that edge that most producers are missing. But I like to ask you something first. Can you like this video? And just go ahead and ask me anything in the comments, and maybe the answer will be on the next video. Deal? Alright, so how do I make this snare wide? The most common approach here is to add a very wide reverb to a return track and send the snare layers there. However, I really like layering my stuff. I believe in layering. I'm a layerer. So instead, I created two more snare layers and I hard panned one to the left and one to the right side. Now, whenever I hard pan something and I don't want it to be super noticeable, I entirely remove the transients. I want these two layers to be heard as just layers, just an extra texture to the main snare sound and not like something clear on its own. So I went ahead and used the Ableton's faders to bypass the initial attack of these samples. Also used the equalizers to remove the low and top end content from these side layers to push them further away into the background. Just making sure it's wide but not up front. Then I looked at these samples with a spectrum analyzer to find out if the most resonant frequencies in the remaining low end would clash with the main snare tunings. I don't want to end up playing a chord with my snare layers, right? So I use the equalizer to cut these peaks, making sure that these layers don't have a lot of tonality, just texture. I call it flattening the spectrum. Check out this visual comparison of the before and after flattening the spectrum. I messed with the faders a little bit to decrease their volume until a point where I thought they were not distracting. I had to make sure they're not too loud. If your side layers are too loud, your whole snare sound kind of loses focus. It loses some of that punchiness we've already achieved. Here's all four layers together. That's when I noticed they were lasting longer than the main snare in the center. Therefore, they wouldn't blend in, they weren't cohesive. So I made an adjustment using the Transient Master plugin, reducing the sustain until they matched the length of the center snares and they started blending together better. They started sounding like this. Now they sound like they belong together, right? I could have done that by using the faders too, but the Transient plugin saved me some time. And then I noticed that there was a phase issue going on. The side samples were out of phase. There was a weird sound, like it wasn't even coming from the speakers. And I used the Ozone Imager to make sure I wasn't hearing things. Luckily, it was an easy fix. I just had to delay the left sample by a little bit, just enough to make the waves align so they wouldn't cancel each other. And after that, the weird sound disappeared, and the ozone imager gave me a visual confirmation that my layers were mostly in phase. By the way, when you layer many snares, there's always some degree of phasing issues, but you can deal with them by adjusting the timing of some layers until it's not something critical that can be distracting and steals the punch. Just gotta keep it at minimal levels. Again, here's what they sound like. They sound huge already, and I haven't even touched the reverbs, but we'll use them for cohesiveness and depth. Here's a cool trick. If you have ghost snare hits, don't use these side layers on them for contrast. The difference in sound will make it look like a real drummer's playing. And before we talk about reverbs, there's another neat trick I'd like to show you. This one's really cool, and it's going to serve two purposes. One, it will help the snare in the center blend together with the snares on the sides better. It will shorten the distance between them. And two, it will add so much movement to your drums that they will never get boring. I added this pink noise track, rolled off some of the low frequencies and super high frequencies, then configured it with a gate that's sidechained to the center snare. The pink noise is gated, so it's quiet all the time, except for when the snare drum hits. Then the gate opens and lets the pink noise sound be heard. And it's followed by an Autopan with a rate that's not in sync with the BPM of the song. It's a random rate, and it's not so fast. That means every time you hear the pink noise, it's going to be in a different place. It makes it feel like the snare is moving around, but not too much because the Autopan is not on 100%. It's about 60% only, so it kind of stays around the center. It never gets to the extreme sides, and I know it may sound too technical, but you gotta try this for yourself. This trick alone can save a boring track. Just be careful not to mix it too loud, or else it will be too much movement and that will steal the show. Now for my snare reverbs, I like to use more than one. For this song, I settled with 2 reverbs and I used Valhalla Vintage Verb for both of them. The first one is the short 700 milliseconds room reverb that's fully stereo and sounds like this by itself. And like this with the whole thing. Besides helping all those layers blend together, this reverb emphasizes the widening effect even more, since it's spread across the entire stereo field. And the second reverb is a longer plate that I turned into mono just to create more depth. It creates a longer tail, but it stays dead center, suggesting that the background is far away from the front. The trick here is to really trim the high end to place it way in the back. Can't go too loud with this one though. These things add up quickly and the mix may start sounding muddy. And make sure to have a little pre-delay just so our snare doesn't get pushed into the background too. It has to have that kind of separation, or else it will just bring the snare to the back of the mix. That's not the effect I'm going for here. I want to suggest depth, but also maintaining the punchiness. On the chain following that reverb, I have a noise gate to interrupt the sound before the next snare hits. So the reverb from the past snare hit doesn't get on top of the next snare hit, and so on. And the gate's followed by a compressor that's sidechained to the snare, ducking the reverb by a few decibels every time the snare hits. Someone may think, oh, you already have a gate, why do you need a sidechain compressor? Because there are some snare rolls in the song where the hits are closer together in time and the gate isn't effective to chop the reverb before the next snare hits. And now we have a snare that's fat, punchy, wide, and properly tuned to the key of the song. Well, that was a lot of work, huh? Let's hear it with all the effects and reverbs. Now that's an interesting snare. It almost sounds like it's too big, but when you turn the rest of the instruments on, it's just right. Listen. Let's try the chorus section. The extra layers are almost unnoticeable with the rest of the mix, and that's done on purpose so they don't become a distraction, but they help give the impression that the snare is larger. It can't be heard as much as it can be felt, and I know that snare sounds wide enough for this song, but it could sound even wider. Wanna know how? By using contrast. In other words, I would need the rest of the instrumental to not be as wide. Then in comparison, my snare would sound even wider. That's why in sparse arrangements, you can make anything sound super wide. In this case, it wouldn't be the best idea. I have a busy arrangement, things are hard panned everywhere, and you haven't even heard the vocals yet. The snare is not a priority in this song, and this is as wide as it will go. But for your songs, now you know a guaranteed trick to make them wider. Nothing is keeping you from making them even wider than this if you have a sparse arrangement, if you leave enough room for it. Sound good? Alright, now you know all my secrets on how to make the professional sounding snares that a great song deserves. And I'm very curious to hear what you come up with after watching this tutorial. I hope you're excited to plug this into your own productions. But before you go, if you like this video, please click the like button because it's a big help for me. And I think you're also going to like the other 2 videos I'll put on the screen in a second. So make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn the notifications on so you don't miss the next ones. That's it for today. Thanks for hanging out. I'm Thales and we'll talk soon.